Hi all, hope you're all well. My name is Tom Jarman and I'm a cybersecurity advisor and a CE assessor at IT Governance. This is a presentation to outline the changes coming to Cyber Essentials on January the 24th, 2022. So the new question set is going to be called Evendine and it will go live on the 24th of January 2022. Any application created on IASME before the 24th of January 2022 will be working on the Beacon question set and will be Cyber Essentials Plus tested, if applicable, on the Beacon requirements. Any application created on IASME after the 24th of January 2022 will be working on the Evendine question set and will be Cyber Essentials Plus tested, if applicable, on the Evendine requirements. Beacon applications will expire on the 24th of July 2022. This is a non-negotiable hard deadline. These changes to Cyber Essentials will have a big impact on the questionnaire. Evendine contains new questions as well as a few revisions of old questions. For example, when listing devices in the new questionnaire, you must include the make and model of the PCs. For example, a Dell Vostro 3480, rather than in Beacon, where you could list Windows PCs or Dell PC. The new questionnaire will take long to fill in and it will take longer to assess. So with these new Cyber Essential changes, there is a new requirements for infrastructure document. This is published by the NCSC and it's version 3. You must read this before starting the questionnaire and it outlines all the requirements for IT infrastructure to achieve compliance with Cyber Essentials. I've left a link down here, but there'll also be a link sent out to you. So please do go and read that before starting the questionnaire. Here's the scope and definition. The Cyber Essentials requirements apply to all devices and software that are within the boundary scope and that meet any of these conditions. They can accept incoming network connections from untrusted internet connected hosts, or they can establish user initiated outbound connections to devices via the internet, or they control the flow of data between any of the above devices and the internet. So as long as a device meets one of those, it will be in scope of the certification. And just a point there at the bottom, all applications must include some end user devices in the scope. Next up is a figure directly from the requirements for infrastructure version 3 document. It's the new scoping picture. So this will clarify what's in scope and what's out of scope. As you can see, BYOD devices and mobile devices are clearly stated as in scope. Just to reiterate the current requirements, any mobile device accessing organizational data and services, this does include emails, are in scope, even when connected via mobile internet. As you can see, cloud services are now clearly defined as being in scope. I'll cover this in more detail in a future slide. And finally, ISP provided home routers are clearly stated as not in scope. However, if a home worker uses an organization provided router, then this will be in scope of the certification. In the new questionnaire, you will need to be listing your hypervisors in use and they will need to be supported and on the latest version that's been released or the latest version that's been released for more than 14 days. Subset is now defined in the requirements document. A subset is defined as part of the organization whose network is segregated from the rest of the organization by a firewall or VLAN. A subset can be used to define what is in scope or what is out of scope. Use of individual firewall rules per device is no longer acceptable. All servers on a subset or whole organization assessment are in scope, and thin client devices are in scope when they connect to an organizational information or services. Any devices accessing virtual desktop infrastructure are in scope, and as mentioned, this does include thin clients. A home working section has now been added to the requirements for infrastructure document. As mentioned before, ISP routers and user provided routers are out of scope, which means that the Cyber Essentials firewall controls need to be applied on the user device, for example, a software firewall. If a router is supplied to the home worker by the applicant organization, then that router will be in scope. Home workers by default will rely on the software firewall as their network boundary. However, like with Beacon, if the home worker is using a corporate VPN, then the internet boundary is on the company firewall or the virtual cloud firewall. BYOD devices are not in scope if they are only used for MFA or native voice apps or native text apps. Cloud services are now defined in the new requirements for infrastructure document, so please go and read that to see what NCSC defined them as. If the applicant's data or services are hosted on cloud services, then the services must be in scope. For cloud services, the applicant is always responsible for ensuring all the controls are implemented, but some of the controls can be implemented by the cloud service provider, who implements which controls depend on type of cloud service. Where the cloud provider implements a control, the applicant must satisfy themselves that this has been done by the cloud provider, committing to implementation within contractual clauses or documents referenced by contract, such as security statements or privacy statements. Cloud providers will often explain how they implement security in documents published in their trust centers, which will include reference to a shared responsibility model. It will not be sufficient anymore to say X company is managing the service as an answer. So as mentioned before, all cloud services are in scope and are to be fully integrated into the scheme. If an organization's data or services are hosted on cloud services, then the organization is responsible for ensuring that all CE controls are implemented. The new requirements now insist that organizations take responsibility for user access control and the secure configuration of their services, which would include securely managing access to the different administration accounts and blocking accounts that they do not need. Where the cloud service is in charge of implementing one or more of the controls, for example, security update management or anti-malware, then the applicant organization has the responsibility to seek evidence that this is done to the required standard. As you can see, here is a table taken again from the requirements for infrastructure document. I'll give you a second to read through it. Who implements the controls will vary depending on the design of the cloud service used, but the table below is the guide to who would typically be expected to implement each control. Also, just to let you know, in the Evendine question set, cloud services have been added to the applies to tags on some of the sections within the questionnaire. So when filling in the questionnaire, like you might see on Beacon, the sections will have a little apply to tag where it points out services or software, etc., that this certain section applies to. So now IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS have been added to that. Protection against brute force requirement has been listed. This can be met by implementing one or more of the following technical controls: multi-factor authentication, throttling the rate of attempts, which means the time the user must wait between attempts increases with each unsuccessful attempt. This should permit no more than 10 guesses in 5 minutes. And finally, lock-in accounts after no more than 10 unsuccessful attempts. So there's separate requirements on password-based authentication for services, and this will be listed under user access control in the requirements for infrastructure document, and that has moved from secure configuration. So there's use of separate accounts to perform admin activities only, so no email, web browsing, or other standard user activities that may expose admin privileges to avoidable risks. This is the same on Beacon. Just to let you know, this also applies to MSPs. So MSPs must have separate accounts as well as any users in the organization performing admin activities. The password-based authentication section has been updated in the requirements for IT infrastructure document. This includes direct input from the NCSC SME, which now includes MFA. Acceptable MFA methods can be found on the NCSC's website. We'll also be sending this link via an email as well, so you can look through that. MFA for administrator accounts on cloud services is a must. Device lock-in is now included within the secure configuration control section. And the requirements on device lock-in are device lock-in by PIN numbers, biometrics, and a password. If credentials are solely to unlock a device, a minimum password or PIN length of at least 6 characters must be used. Where the credentials could also be used elsewhere, the full password requirements in user access control must be applied. This applies to shared authentication platforms. So just to reiterate that last point, if it only applies to one device, i.e. an individual tablet/phone, then 6 characters is fine. However, if it applies to more than one device, for example, a cloud service like a Microsoft account, then it has to be at least 8 or 12, depending on which technical controls you have in place. Next up, all in scope software must be kept up to date. All in scope software must be licensed and supported, be removed from devices when it becomes unsupported, or removed from scope by using a defined subset that prevents all traffic to/from the internet, have automatic updates enabled where possible, and be updated, including applying any manual configuration changes required to make the update effective. And this is within 14 days of an update being released, where the update fixes a vulnerability with a severity that the product vendor describes as critical or high risk, when there are no details of the level of vulnerabilities that the update fixes provided by the vendor, and the update has listed fixes for vulnerabilities with CVSS version 3 score of 7 or higher. So that's a new change in Evendine, where before they wanted to see the CVSS score of 7 or higher, along with it meeting certain requirements to do with attack vectors, etc. Now it's a baseline. If the score is higher than 7, has to be applied within 14 days. So Cyber Essentials Plus changes. As mentioned before, all cloud services are included in the scope, and IASME has also removed the 90% rule when calculating sample sizes. This is to ensure that there's an accurate representative of all devices in scope that are being tested. So there have been some changes to the existing Cyber Essentials Plus tests, and these have been highlighted in red, which will be discussed in the upcoming slides. And there have been 2 additional tests, MFA and account separation. IASME will be releasing a new flowchart for the external testing. These changes should not affect how the external scan will be completed. The applicant's public IP addresses will still be scanned by Nessus, and anything above a score of 7 will need to be remediated. The internal scan no longer has specific requirements for a vulnerability to be classified as a failing issue. All vulnerabilities above CVSS version 3 score of 7, which is classed as high or critical, will have to be remediated. The email and browser test has to be completed by the end user, and the assessor will have to observe and record the results of the test. Multifactor authentication must be tested on all cloud services. For the Cyber Essentials Plus 2022, standard users will only be tested if question A7.17 MFA has been applied to all cloud services, has been answered as yes. All users of sample devices and one administrator account will need to be tested for MFA, and this must be tested on all cloud services unless multiple cloud services share the same authentication service. Then this test only needs to be performed once. The final test is account separation, which is used to confirm that standard users don't have administrative privileges and that there is account separation between standard users and administrator accounts. This will be tested by running an application as an administrator and confirming that the user is unable to run the application as an admin. There are some grace periods with some of these requirements. These are as follows. For MFA for all cloud services, the requirement will apply to administrator accounts from when Evendine goes live. So that's the 24th of January, 2022. MFA for users will be marked for information only, and MFA for users requirement will be marked for compliance from January 2023. So essentially, IASME are giving you a year. For thin clients, the new question will be for information only for the first 12 months. Thin clients need to be supported and receiving security updates, and the requirement will be marked for compliance from January 2023. So like the MFA, you've got a year to sort out that requirement. And lastly, for security update management, the new question will be information only for the first 12 months. And again, as mentioned for the previous, this will be marked for compliance from January 2023. Just to summarize the changes, so the new question set Evendine will be live on the 24th of January 2022. There'll be new Cyber Essentials Plus tests for Evendine questionnaire applicants. Big changes to the scheme, and these are centered around scope, cloud services, security update management, thin clients, password-based and MFA requirements, device lock-in, and home working. There will be grace period for some of the requirements. This video will be sent out along with all the necessary links, so please read through them. As mentioned, especially the requirements for IT infrastructure document. This will outline all the requirements that you need to fulfill to pass Cyber Essentials. One of these links that will be sent out will be in Microsoft Form, so please fill that in if you have any questions. What we'll do is we'll collate all of those questions. If needed, we'll go directly to IASME and we will follow up on these questions later. Thank you all for listening.